This is weird. How does that happen? Oh well. Okay, so I want to look at that object. Start off by just printing out the object and seeing what the address looks like. See if it gives us any information or it still looks like a generic object. Looks like they wrote a two-string method for it. Yep, they did. Okay, well, so we can look at this and we can tell that this whole thing is going to be an object, and we have a single value in there called TXS. So let's try to extract that one value. So that's going to be, well, it's going to be a JSON object. So really what they've given us here is their sample code isn't real, isn't equivalent to JSON that we would get. The top level value here is an array. Ours is an object. And pretty much everything you'll ever read is going to be a JSON object. So ours is an object, and we want to get field number 1. So we're going to create a JSON object. So this guy, instead of just being an object, is going to be a JSON object. And we'll parse it out of there. We need to import org.json.simple. Okay, so this guy's actually a JSON object, not just a generic object. And then we're going to say object.get. And in here, it's getting the value associated with the variable named, I'm thinking 1. We want to get the value associated with the variable named TX, was it TXT? TXX? XS. Okay. So we're going to say object.get TXS and see what that looks like. Okay, and there's just the values associated with that. Okay, now we know that this guy is an array, correct? Okay, he's an array. So TXS stands for transactions. That's what the shorthand for. So now we have an array of transactions. So we know we have a JSON array called the transactions. And this guy is going to be equal to just to be explicit here, I'll cast it. I doubt very much we need to. And then we need to import org JSON simple JSON array. So now we have a JSON array of the transactions. Okay? Now, for JSON array, we need to be able to go through these transactions and, let's just say, display them. So if we look at the transactions, I'm just going to print it out again. I'm going to call that transactions. Again, they've written a two-string method that makes it look pretty for us. We can see the transactions is a whole bunch of objects, a whole bunch of JSON objects. So we want to spin through this array, grabbing each transaction and displaying it to the screen. We're working with understanding how we can iterate through a JSON object using simple JSON. Okay, so my guess is, did they give us an example of, no, let's figure it out. So let's do for JSON object JO in the transactions dot, actually they probably did it as an iterator, so I could probably just say transactions. Oh, things come out as objects. That's not going to fly. So we'll have to do it as a normal for loop. For int I is equal to 0, I is less than the transactions dot, so like a count, length, size, I plus plus. Okay, so for each time, so we have 0 to transactions, the transactions dot size number of elements. Oh, we actually could have used the for each loop. This will work. I'll show you the for each loop version of this. For object JO in the transactions. Transactions is actually an instance of array list. Now we can say system.out.println, just for the sake of argument, we'll say JSON object JO, because we know that guy actually is a JSON object, not just a generic object. But because they wrote it in terms of transactions and didn't use generics, it comes out as objects, not JSON objects. So we'll run this. Now it should show us each transaction individually on a line by itself. Is the theory, at least. Did I hit it? There we go. It's actually a very discouraging thing when you have tremors so bad in your hand you're not sure if you hit the play button or not. Okay, so we got each individual transaction. Now we know that these guys look like objects, right? So we know each of these guys is a JSON object as we're finding it right here. Now we can extract the information out of it. So we need to look. So let's just look at this very bottom one as an example of a transaction. So we have a result. And again, why can't I scroll? I want to scroll up. Oh well, whatever. Okay, so result, this looks like a number of Satoshis to me. So we'll have to see if that is the case here shortly. Block height. This is actually an interesting thing. Block height tells us where in the entire blockchain this particular block that this transaction came from lives. Okay, not really going to be beneficial to us because there's no guarantee that all the votes are going to be within a single block, but more just informational. That's what block height is. Time, I'm guessing this is number of seconds since 1970. This is the size of something. I don't know what that is. That's an address. This is a transaction index. Okay, so spent is me sending it somewhere, I believe. If spent is true, spent is false should be me receiving it, I believe. And we'll be able to confirm that. Okay, so this is the IP address of the pool or the person that won that block. And somewhere in here we should have oh wait, it's like we have multiple. Let's look at it on here to break this down a little bit. All right, so here's our transactions. That's the value we're currently looking at, which is this array of transactions. It looks like let's look at the API here. Here's the Blockchain.info data API. We're using the one that lets us get all transactions from a single address. We should have a number of transactions, which should be the third thing. So we have 23 transactions in here. We should have the total received, total sent, final balance should be the next thing. So that gives us, it's already doing some math for us. But what we need to be careful of with this is we need to double check for our vote count how many votes went to different addresses and were the correct size and stuff like that, rather than let it accumulate everything that ever went to an address. So this is more trivia information for us. But if you're trying to look at an individual wallet, or you're making a mobile app for a mobile wallet, this would actually probably be good enough to show them that stuff. Then we actually have the transactions. So the transactions is an array of transactions. Now, does it actually tell us what a single transaction looks like? Here's a single transaction. Okay. So, single transaction has a hash value, a version, a size, who it was relayed by, inputs, not really useful to us. Well, actually, inputs would be if it was all right, so this is what an individual transaction might look like. Does that match ours? So we have results, version, size. What's that? I don't see results there. That's a block. Okay, it has to be related to this transaction data structure up here. So we have this stuff, then we have inputs. That's this guy right here. So here's spent is true. So the idea should be I'm sending that out to somebody. There's a transaction index. And let's try to, while we're doing this, let's match this up with Blockchain.info's actual interface for their wallet. My transactions. Okay. So we're not sure if it's doing this from forward or back. So 4HQ is the last digits and the 2 from. Okay, 4HQ. That seems like it's this first one. Okay. So this was sending something is what I think this means. Here's the index of that transaction. Here's where I was sending it to. And the value is 246306. Let's look at that in here. That was actually receiving. Let's look at this transaction in more detail. Here's an example of, over time, how many confirmations you end up getting for a transaction. 10,775 individual people confirm that. Okay, so I received 0.01. Okay, that makes sense. Didn't we have spend is, oh, we had spend is true. So spent equals true doesn't really tell us. As of right now, that seems like it means that we received something. Unless this is keeping track of whether or not I've actually sent those Bitcoin out. I received them, but I did spend them later on. This is the address it came from. Here's the value, 246,306, and that's, oh, there's more numbers to that. That is this number, and this is in Satoshi. So one Satoshi is 0.123456. I think that's one Satoshi. Times this number. What is that value in? I know it's sending things in Satoshis. I know that part for a fact. So this value must be equal to, this was 0.01 Satoshis in here, right?
But maybe it's the value of that transaction fee taken off. See on the bottom it says that.
Yeah. Actually, that's interesting. Does it list the transaction fee somewhere in here? Where does this array start? So here's a transaction. Here's a new array inside there. I just want to single out one of these guys. So we can look at it in a little bit cleaner way. This ends this guy right here. So we're still looking for this is all for a single transaction. Are these validations for this transaction? Yeah. Well, let's see if we can confirm that. So we need to look at, so here's transactions. For each thing in transactions, we need to get the inputs. Wait, no.
No, you need to get out. In inputs, you need to get, I think out is the name of
The variable. So we need to get inputs first. Well, hold on. This is where, that's where this ends, right?
Okay.
So we're at this.
So you actually
Here, out. So we want out. So let's get out, which is an array, and then see how many elements are in that array. That should tell us some stuff. All right, so So we have this JSON object dot get out, which would be a JSON array. And then let's just print out AR.size. See how many elements were in there. It can't have in it all 10,000 validations. Okay, so here's the transaction. So it had 301 things in out. All right, fair enough. So out is an array, and one thing in out looks like this. So that is spent equals false, transaction index. Here's the address. This thing was from NTP. Let's look at that in here. Okay, it's not from one of the two froms, so it must be validations, or at least value was 5, this number, which I think should be 0.5. Was this all of them on one page, or was there more? Okay, here's for a single transaction. Oy. That's that NTP, right? So I think we're onto something. NTP, so this seems to be a validation. Then there's other ones in here for 0.01, 0.02. So there must be 300 and some odd of these, which we just printed out. So we need to figure out what these are. I'm thinking it's validations. Okay, but we're into the data now at least. So I'll see everybody on Wednesday, and we'll figure out what these pieces are. And I'll probably post this lecture as a part 1 and a part 2.